Okay, today we're going to be replacing the front struts on this 1973 Porsche 914. Now I've already replaced the front strut on the driver's side, and you can see that the ride is already about 2 inches higher. The front strut was collapsed. Here's the original Coney strut. You can see that it's collapsed and fully extended. Here's the replacement strut. We're going to be using an XLG from KYB. This is an aftermarket product. Probably could argue that it's not as good as a Coney or some of the other brands, but a strut in working order is much better than a collapsed strut. While we have the front wheel off, you might want to think about doing some other repairs. And now would be an excellent time to replace the front brake pads, for example. Also, the tie rod ends and the ball joints. If you're suspicious that they're going bad, it might be a good time to replace them. In fact, depending on how you take this apart, you might find that you have to replace the ball joint. Just something to think about when you're placing your order for those shocks. You might want to go ahead and order those ball joints and tie rod ends as well. Replacing the front struts on a Porsche 914 is a fairly straightforward procedure. You don't need a lot of specialized tools. You will probably need a pickle fork to spread apart the ball joints and the tie rod ends. You'll need a punch, and you'll need an assortment of wrenches and sockets up to 22 millimeters. First we're going to start with loosening the 22 millimeter nut at the top of the strut tower. You're probably going to have to take a cold chisel and bend over the tab of the retaining washer. Then take a breaker bar and loosen this up, but don't remove it. Now that we have the front wheel removed and the car is supported by jack stands, we're going to take the front brake caliper off. It's held on with 2 bolts in the rear, and we'll also remove the brake line that goes to it. Okay, here's a tip. You can take the rubber grommets off your brake bleeders and put them over top of your brake line. It fits on there perfectly. And that'll keep the brake fluid from dripping all over the place. After we do that, we'll want to take off the retaining clip and remove the brake line so it hangs freely in the air. Okay, so the brake caliper has been removed and we have it in our hand here. Now is an excellent time to check the condition of the brake pads and replace them if necessary. You've come this far, you might as well do it. They're not that expensive. Next we're going to take out the cotter pin that goes through the castle nut on top of the tie rod end. Take note when we put this bit back together that the tie rod end goes underneath here and the castle nut goes on top. Now that the tie rod end here has been removed and is hanging free, we've turned the strut housing and we can look down here, right there, and see that there's a nut. On the other side of that nut is a double tapered bolt. Now the trick to this is to back that nut off so it is nearly flush with the end of the bolt and then start hammering on it until you can pound it loose. Once it becomes loose, then you can use a punch. Okay, now the double tapered pin has been removed from the bottom of the strut, and the ball joint has to be separated from the strut now. This is probably where you'll use the pickle fork. You're probably going to end up busting up that rubber boot, and you can't get the rubber boot separately, so you're going to have to end up buying a new ball joint if that happens. You're probably going to find that this is really, really corroded and rusted in there, and it's going to require a lot of work. So now the bottom of the strut has been separated from the ball joint. This side came apart much easier than the other side. And now we come back up top and we loosen this the rest of the way while holding underneath. The strut assembly will come free now. We have the strut assembly in front of us. It's off the car. We can go ahead and lift off the protective sleeve. can take off the double rubber spring and then the triple rubber spring. Underneath that is the plastic washer. This here disassembles, and inside this body is the strut, the actual strut that we'll replace. Here we have the old strut housing. The old strut comes out, and the new strut gets dropped in. KYBs come with a new part that goes up here. And you just put that on and tighten it up. Okay, so we have the repaired strut assembly with the rubber springs installed in there. Don't forget to put the rubber springs back in. You also might want to clean up this protective sleeve. It's probably pretty full of dirt and grit, and you don't want that back in there. That's going to compromise the integrity of the strut eventually. Over here, we have everything ready to go. Like I mentioned, this is an excellent time to replace the ball joint, if you haven't done so. Whether or not you've replaced the ball joint, remember to have this little notch here, facing forward. So when you slide the strut assembly on, everything will be lined up. You won't be able to twist it in later when you put in the double tapered key that goes in there. At this point, you've probably made the discovery that this is not going to fit back in there easily. So what you have to do is put the floor jack underneath the ball joint and jack it up as you're guiding the top of the strut back into position. You might have to push down on the top of this and compress it, and compress it while you're jacking and work it back into the hole that it came out of. Okay, at this point you can go ahead and start putting the 22mm bolts back on at the top of the strut tower. You're going to have to hold this plate here in place so it doesn't rotate until have it tightened down enough to grab that rubber. Now that we've attached the bottom and the top of the strut housing, we can go ahead and attach the tie rod end. Remember to place that so the castle nut is at the top. Don't forget to put the cotter pin in, and then we come around to the front here and put on the brake calipers. Don't forget to bleed the brakes when you're done. Alright, so we're moving right along. The tie rod has been replaced, the front brake caliper has been replaced, and the brakes have been bled. Now all we have to do is put on the wheel. This car is now sitting up a couple inches higher than it was just a few hours ago, and remember, that's not a performance modification. That's just replacing a defective strut with an aftermarket strut and, bringing it back to specifications. Now, we still have to adjust the axle height on this vehicle. We'll do that at a later time. Now we're on to replacing the rear struts, and that'll be in another video.